January 23, 2026. An American president suspends a multi-billion-dollar tariff war. Mainstream media celebrates. Markets breathe a collective sigh of relief, and you believe the crisis is over. But the reality that news agencies refuse to broadcast is completely different. What you are about to discover was not accidental. It was not a successfully negotiated deal. It was a silent admission that the American dollar is collapsing and that the financial world knows it. For the last 72 hours, while television news anchors talked about an agreement between Trump and Europe, gold has shattered historical barriers. $4,937 to $4,969 per ounce, nearly touching the 5,000 threshold. Meanwhile, European pension funds managing hundreds of billions of dollars have begun selling US Treasury bonds in mass quantities. Not symbolic amounts, not strategic rebalancing, panic selling. The kind of selling that demonstrates absolute terror. The question nobody is asking is simple. Why are the largest institutional investors on Earth abandoning the safest asset in history at the exact moment when the White House announces it has achieved a diplomatic victory? The answer is buried under layers of economic jargon, carefully coordinated press releases, and a narrative constructed specifically to distract you from what is actually happening. And what is actually happening is a fundamental restructuring of global geopolitical and financial order. Not in 50 years, not in a decade, now. This video decodes the dossier that corporate journalists are terrified to touch. The tension over Greenland did not begin as a territorial dispute. It began as a race for gold. Not the gold you imagine, real gold. Billions of tons of ore containing gold, copper, zinc, and rare earth elements buried under ice that is disappearing at accelerating rates. Climate change has triggered the first genuine battle for control of an entire continent. While the world was distracted with elections, stock markets, and domestic political theater, two empires began positioning for the greatest geological treasure of the century. On one side stands the United States. On the other side stands an increasingly independent but still fragile Europe. In the middle, Denmark, Greenland, and over $1 billion in mineral wealth waiting to be extracted. Trump saw the opportunity, and he asked for something nobody had asked for since 1867, total military and economic control over the Arctic. Not to buy Greenland as he suggested for the cameras, to control it, to dominate it, to transform it into a geopolitical power base that would encircle Europe and crush China simultaneously. The resource acquisition was secondary. The strategic positioning was primary. The end game was global dominance. The European reaction was instantaneous. Mette Frederiksen, Prime Minister of Denmark, placed the word sovereignty on the table. And it was not negotiation. It was an ultimatum disguised as diplomacy. Greenland spoke as well, publicly. It declared that its identity, its autonomy, its very existence as a people was not currency to be traded in negotiations between superpowers. But Trump did not retreat. He escalated. He threatened tariffs of 10 to 25% on 8 European nations. United Kingdom, France, Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, Ireland, Norway, each received the message in simultaneity. The message was crystal clear. Give me control of the Arctic or watch your economy burn. This is where the official narrative completely collapses. Journalists said Trump was engaging in political theater, that it was bluffing, that nobody would actually escalate to a commercial war of that magnitude. But on January 20th, when the threats became concrete, the market responded with the largest single-day decline in months. The S&P 500 plummeted 2.1%. The Nasdaq dropped 2.4%. $30 billion in market value was erased in a single trading session. Institutional investors were not laughing. They were terrified. They understood what was at stake in ways that retail investors and news consumers did not, because they know something you do not. A tariff war of this magnitude is not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It is about the death of globalization as we have known it. It is about the collapse of supply chains that sustain modern civilization. It is about the truth that nobody can speak aloud in mainstream forums. The United States no longer has enough economic power to win this confrontation. Not anymore. Not with a national debt exceeding $35 trillion. Not with a dollar that is being systematically challenged as the global reserve currency. So Trump did what any leader in a position of weakness would do. He negotiated, he suspended the tariff threats. He announced a framework agreement with NATO that supposedly grants the United States total military access to Greenland for a project called Golden Dome, a base for radar, for surveillance, for missile defense. All very rational, all very secure, all very carefully constructed to appear like a victory. But it was not a victory. It was surrender disguised as diplomatic achievement. Because in the moment he suspended the tariffs, Europe received the real message. This was never about Greenland. This was never about geopolitics in the traditional sense. This was about the dollar. This was about who controls the global monetary system. This was about the fact that American hegemony is weakening and nobody knows what comes next. And that fear, that absolute existential fear, is exactly what explains the gold price. Gold does not surge toward $5,000 per ounce by accident. Gold surges when paper money becomes toxic, when the largest investors on the planet begin to seriously ask whether the currency they are holding is actually secure, whether it has any real value. The European pension funds already had their answer. Alecta, Sweden's largest pension fund managing billions in retirement savings, began unloading US Treasury bonds. Academiker Pension, Denmark's major pension fund, did exactly the same. Not in symbolic quantities designed for public relations, in massive quantities, in numbers that demonstrate institutional panic. They cited an unacceptable increase in American geopolitical and fiscal risk. Translation: we no longer trust the American government. We no longer believe they will be able to repay these debts. We are exiting the position entirely. When the largest institutional investors on Earth begin selling US Treasury bonds, the global financial system is shifting, not in theory, not in speculation, in practice, already. This is not something that might happen. It is something that is happening right now, not gradual over decades, collapse in slow motion, because once they start exiting, others follow. It becomes panic. It becomes contagion. It becomes the moment when the system that has dominated global finance for 70 years begins its final unraveling. And it is exactly this reality that corporate journalists will not touch, because their employers have a vested interest in maintaining the illusion for one more quarter, for one more year, for enough time to position themselves before the collapse becomes undeniable. They have financial interests tied to the current system. They have access granted by maintaining relationships with power. They have careers built on not asking the questions that matter. So they report the surface narrative. They celebrate the agreement. They ignore the signals. They lie by omission. But while you were consuming news about a successful negotiation, economic reality was reorganizing itself. The Arctic is not just a geographic region. It is the future of the global economy. Gold, copper, lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements, all in impossible concentration in a single location. All the materials the world will desperately need to survive energetically over the next 3 decades. all buried under ice that is disappearing faster than models predicted, all controlled by whoever dominates that region militarily and politically. China understands this. Russia understands this. Europe is beginning to awaken to this reality. And the United States? The United States attempted to resolve this through force, through threats, through what used to work when America held unchallenged global dominance. But when you are indebted beyond redemption, when your currency is being systematically challenged, when your allies are selling your debt, force does not work. Diplomacy does not work. Nothing conventional works. Because the problem is not political, it is mathematical. American debt is unsustainable. The numbers are there for anyone with basic accounting knowledge to observe. $35 trillion, a budget deficit that expands each fiscal year, inflation that has returned to show its face after temporarily receding, a real estate market beginning to freeze, companies starting to announce layoffs, a population that is becoming progressively poorer in real terms, even as nominal numbers appear impressive on financial websites. The entire structure is theatrical while the foundation deteriorates beneath. So when Trump suspends tariffs, it is not victory. It is not the result of superior negotiating position. It is surrender. It is admission that he also knows that an escalated trade war would break what is already breaking. It is recognition that the United States requires European support, because without Europe there is no NATO, and without NATO there is no structural architecture that allows the dollar to maintain its position as the global reserve currency. It is pure calculation of institutional survival. Now you begin to understand why gold is shattering records while stock markets decline. The two do not happen simultaneously by accident. They happen because the world is shifting assets. It is exchanging paper currencies, government bonds, and political promises for gold. Real gold. Metal that cannot be printed, that cannot be devalued by central bank decree, that cannot be controlled by government policy, that cannot be counterfeited. The financial elite understand this. This is why they are moving. This is why European pension funds are selling dollars and purchasing gold. This is why the price is breaking historical records week after week. Because when you are large enough to understand what is coming, you move first, and you move silently. Because if you announce aloud that the dollar is in mortal danger, you create the panic that destroys the dollar immediately. Better to exit in darkness. Better to allow small investors to believe everything is fine while you reposition the largest pools of capital on Earth. But it is obvious to anyone actually looking at the data. The system is shifting. The monetary order that has lasted since 1944, since Bretton Woods, since American military dominance made the dollar the inevitable global standard, is ending. And nobody knows what comes next. Nobody knows if it will be a centralized global digital currency controlled by an international central bank. Nobody knows if it will be gold backing. Nobody knows if it will be cryptocurrencies. Nobody knows if it will be a completely new system of exchange we have not yet imagined. What is known is that the current monetary regime is approaching terminal condition. This transition will not be easy. It will not be smooth. It will not be painless, but it is inevitable. And it will touch your life in ways you do not currently imagine. Because the monetary system is not a technical detail that economists argue about in academic papers. It is the foundation of everything. It decides who is wealthy and who is poor. It decides which nations hold power and which are subordinate. It decides if you can afford food, if you can afford energy, if you can afford the basic mechanics of living. When a currency dies, the transition is violent. Inflation explodes exponentially. Savings evaporate. Employment collapses. Small businesses cease operations. It is chaos. It is uncertainty. It is poverty for those without assets or knowledge. And it is exactly what you are seeing happen now in ultra-slow motion. Around the world, the signals are visible to those willing to observe. Supply chains are becoming increasingly fragile. Food prices are advancing. Energy prices are volatile. Unemployment is beginning to emerge. Rental markets are tightening. Small business failures are accelerating. And nobody connects the dots because nobody wants to admit that the currency is dying. It is easier to blame local suppliers. It is easier to blame environmental policies. It is easier to blame regulations or corporate greed or any convenient scapegoat except the truth, that the dollar has lost 70% of its purchasing power over 50 years, and nobody acted as though this required serious attention. Nobody thought it would matter. Nobody imagined the day would arrive when the global monetary system would require complete restructuring. They believed it was eternal. They believed it was immutable. They believed it was the law of nature. But it is not. It is fiction. It is political construction. And all political constructions eventually fall. The Greenland crisis is merely the most visible symptom. It is the moment when the system failed to conceal the underlying problem. It is the moment when a desperate president demanded territory. It is the moment when Europe realized it can no longer trust America. It is the moment when the largest investors on Earth began quietly abandoning ship. It is the moment when gold broke through the $5,000 barrier. It is the moment when the dollar's position as unchallenged reserve currency came under direct assault. All of this converging simultaneously is not coincidence. It is the synchronicity of a system entering collapse phase. Different actors, different markets, different continents, different asset classes, but all responding to the identical underlying event, the recognition that the monetary regime is reaching its terminal date. This is not conspiracy theory. This is data observation. This is capital flow analysis. This is reading the currencies. You understand what is even more terrifying? The majority of people do not see it. They continue waking up, going to work, consuming news, believing that everything is normal. They believe that the Greenland Agreement was a victory. They believe that the market is recovering strength. They believe that the economy is fundamentally sound. Because television told them so. Because politicians said it was true. Because it is psychologically more comfortable to believe that everything is fine than to confront the reality that the system is breaking. But numbers do not lie. Numbers do not adjust narratives to make people feel better. Numbers do not care about political convenience or media-coordinated messaging. Numbers show that on January 23, 2026, the world changed direction. Not dramatically visible to untrained eyes, not apparent on cable news or in mainstream reporting, but fundamentally, unmistakably. The largest investors began repositioning. Gold began breaking records. Government bonds began being unloaded. The dollar began losing its incontestable supremacy, and geopolitics began reorganizing around scarcity instead of abundance. You live in a world where abundant, cheap oil allowed globalization to flourish for decades, allowed every economy to be structured around infinite growth, allowed governments to become completely indebted because they could always print more currency to service the debt, allowed the illusion of prosperity while the actual purchasing power of normal people declined systematically. But that world is ending, not in some distant theoretical future. Now, this year, this month. And when one world ends and another begins, the people who understood what was happening early and positioned themselves accordingly prosper. The people who ignored the signals suffer. This is not prediction. This is not fear-mongering. This is mathematics. This is simply what always happens when monetary systems transition. There have always been those who understood what was occurring early. There have always been those who repositioned before the majority woke up to reality. There have always been those who suffered because they did not comprehend the signals. The difference is information. The difference is access to analysis that corporate media will not provide. You have access now. You know that gold is breaking records because the system is breaking under the weight of its own contradictions. You know that European pension funds are selling dollars because the financial elite understand the dollar is in fundamental danger. You know that the attempt to control Greenland was a move of desperation, not strength. You know that the suspension of tariffs was surrender, not a negotiated compromise between equals. You know that the official narrative is fundamentally false. With that knowledge, you have a choice. You can dismiss what you have heard. You can return to your routine. You can believe that everything will ultimately be fine because it always has been. You can trust that your politicians understand what they are doing. You can trust that your banks are protecting you. You can trust that the future will resemble the past. You can make that choice. Millions will. And millions will suffer when the reality becomes impossible to ignore. Or you can prepare yourself. You can begin to understand how monetary systems function. You can begin to think strategically about your financial future. You can begin to move your assets into positions that maintain value when currency systems shift. You can begin seeking information beyond the carefully controlled boundaries of corporate media. You can begin positioning yourself as one of the few who understood the transition while it was happening. You can begin acting like someone who understands that the old world is dying and something entirely new is being born. The geopolitics matter less than the signal. Greenland is a symbol. The gold price is the reality. The selling of US bonds is the mechanism. The awakening of institutional investors to the danger is the moment. And your response to this moment will determine whether you are positioned for what comes next or whether you are caught unprepared. History shows that monetary collapses are never smooth. They are never orderly. They are never fair to those holding assets in the dying currency. The transition from the British pound to the US dollar took decades and multiple wars. The transition from the gold standard to fiat currency created chaos and redistributed wealth violently. And the transition from the US dollar as the unquestioned reserve currency to whatever replaces it will be equally disruptive. The only question is whether you will understand it in time to protect yourself. The signals are there. The gold is there. The capital flows are there. The geopolitical repositioning is there. The desperate attempt to control critical resources is there. All the elements of systemic transition are in place, and the machinery is already moving. Not in some distant future that you can ignore until it arrives, but now, while you are watching, while you are reading, while you are still in a position to act. If this analysis has helped you understand what mainstream media is determined to hide from you, subscribe to this channel. Because we will continue monitoring these signals. We will continue decoding what news agencies do not have the courage to articulate. We will continue looking at numbers when others are hypnotized by narratives. We will continue being the voice that speaks truth, not comfortable lies designed to maintain power structures. But I have a question for you now. If the monetary system is breaking, if the largest investors are already repositioning, if the gold price has already broken records, if European pension funds are already selling dollars, why do you still have the majority of your wealth stored in a currency that institutions are abandoning? Why are you trusting in the security of the system when the people who have the most accurate information are running from it? Leave your answer in the comments. Leave your observations about the signals you see in your own life, in your own city, in your own work. Because when a system changes, people feel it first in their wallets. People feel it in their ability to pay for basic necessities. People feel it in their job security. People feel it in their sense of the future. Your experiences matter. Your stories complete the picture. And together we construct the truth that the institutions desperately want to keep hidden. This is the reality. This is the analysis that connects the dots. This is the documentation of the moment when American dominance entered its final chapter. And this is just the beginning. The story that will define this decade is being written right now. And you now know what is actually being written underneath the narrative of diplomatic victories and market recoveries and political deals. You know the truth. Now act accordingly.